Canada will be responding to the U.S. trade action with 25% tariffs.
The relationship between Canada and the United States has long been defined by deep economic integration, shared values, and cooperation across a multitude of sectors. Yet history has also shown that this close partnership is not immune to tensions, especially when politics and national interests collide. In a dramatic and unexpected move, Canada has just broken a major electric vehicle (EV) deal with the United States, retaliating against newly elected U.S. President Donald Trump's imposition of sweeping tariffs on key trade partners. The abrupt end to what had been hailed as a transformative agreement for North America's EV future signals a turning point in continental economic relations and introduces a new layer of uncertainty in a rapidly evolving global energy transition. Before we start, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more exclusive news. The original EV agreement between Canada and the U.S. had been celebrated as a cornerstone of North America's clean energy and automotive ambitions. It linked Canadian critical mineral resources, including lithium, nickel, and cobalt, with U.S. battery manufacturing capacity and electric vehicle production. The deal was structured to provide a steady, secure, and environmentally responsible supply chain for EV components, easing North American dependence on overseas markets, particularly China. With shared investments in mining operations, battery plants, and research initiatives, both countries had embarked on a joint journey towards sustainable transportation. Canada's vast natural resources complemented American industrial might, and the agreement was seen not only as an economic boon, but also as a geopolitical counterbalance to Asia's dominance in EV supply chains. That equilibrium has now been shattered. In one of his first major economic moves after taking office, President Trump announced a package of new tariffs targeting U.S. trade partners, including Canada. While couched in the language of protecting American workers and revitalizing domestic industry, the tariffs sent shockwaves through Canada's political and business communities. Steel, aluminum, agricultural products, and a host of manufactured goods were affected. But perhaps most significantly, the tariffs also extended, either directly or through ripple effects, to the EV sector, undermining the very foundations of the bilateral agreement. Canadian officials responded swiftly and decisively, citing not only economic damage but a violation of the spirit of fair and cooperative trade. Ottawa announced that it was withdrawing from the EV deal effective immediately. Prime ministerial statements emphasized that Canada would not be treated as a subordinate partner, especially not in a field where its contributions, particularly raw materials and environmental stewardship, were so essential. Withdrawing from the deal was portrayed as a necessary act of sovereignty and a message that Canada would defend its interests, even at the cost of economic friction with its closest ally. The implications of this withdrawal are both immediate and far-reaching. For one, it sends EV manufacturers and investors scrambling. Joint battery plant projects planned for Ontario and Michigan now face uncertain futures. Canadian provinces like Quebec, which had secured multi-billion-dollar deals based on the agreement, must reassess their economic forecasts and infrastructure plans. U.S. automakers who had banked on streamlined access to Canadian materials must now pivot, potentially turning to less stable or more expensive international markets. The disruption reverberates across multiple industries and threatens to derail what had been seen as a carefully constructed North American advantage in the global EV race. Supply chains, already fragile from the aftershocks of the COVID-19 pandemic and other geopolitical tensions, now face another rupture. North American EV goals were built around the assumption of reliability and proximity between Canada and the U.S. Lithium mined in northern Quebec or nickel extracted from Sudbury was destined for refineries and battery production lines just across the border. The withdrawal of the agreement will likely force companies to re-engineer logistics, absorb higher costs, and confront new regulatory hurdles. Delays in production and uncertainty in future supplies will add strain to automakers striving to meet climate targets and consumer demand. The strategic ramifications extend beyond economics. This breakdown in EV collaboration could cede ground to international competitors. China, already dominant in EV battery manufacturing, may find new leverage as North American cohesion falters. The European Union, observing this breakdown, may double down on internal EV supply chain resilience. Wary of depending on external partners vulnerable to political disruption, the United States, having turned inward under Trump's renewed protectionist stance, risks isolating itself at a time when global collaboration is increasingly seen as essential for tackling climate change and leading in emerging technologies. For Canada, the cancellation of the deal also introduces hard choices. The EV sector has been central to its green economic strategy. Losing access to U.S. manufacturing hubs complicates its path forward. But Canadian officials seem prepared to explore other avenues, potentially deepening ties with European or Asian markets. There is speculation about new bilateral mineral and battery partnerships with the EU, especially Germany, which is aggressively expanding its EV production capabilities. Meanwhile, countries like South Korea and Japan, which have shown sustained interest in ethical and sustainable mineral sourcing, could become more prominent partners for Canada. Domestically, both Canadian and American political landscapes are set to shift in response to this development. In Canada, the government will face pressure to shore up confidence in its economic planning and assertiveness on the world stage. It must demonstrate that walking away from the EV deal was not just a political statement, but a strategically sound move that will ultimately serve Canadian interests. For President Trump, the fallout may prove more complex. While his base may applaud his hardline stance and America First messaging, industries affected by the broken EV deal, especially automakers and green energy advocates, may begin to voice opposition. The move could create fractures within the Republican Party, particularly among lawmakers from manufacturing-heavy states who had supported the original EV collaboration for the jobs and economic revitalization it promised. The timing of the tariff announcement, so early in Trump's new term, suggests that economic nationalism will once again define his presidency. However, this renewed emphasis on unilateral action may face more robust international pushback than it did during his previous term. Global attitudes have evolved, and economic blocs have grown warier of U.S. unpredictability. Canada's immediate and robust response may embolden other nations to resist American economic pressure rather than acquiesce. The message seems clear. Even long-standing allies will no longer accept unfavorable terms under the guise of partnership. The collapse of the EV deal also casts a shadow over North America's climate goals. The agreement had been a beacon of progress toward reduced carbon emissions, sustainable transportation, and energy independence. Without it, both Canada and the U.S. will face greater challenges in meeting their targets under the Paris Agreement and other climate frameworks. EV adoption is a critical pillar in reducing transportation-related emissions, and any setback in production and infrastructure could have lasting environmental consequences. Meanwhile, labor groups on both sides of the border find themselves caught in the crossfire. Unionized workers in Canadian mining towns and American assembly plants were counting on the EV deal to secure long-term employment in a transforming economy. The cancellation introduces volatility where there had been hope. Worker advocacy organizations are likely to increase pressure on both governments, demanding clarity and protection in the wake of the upheaval. There is a growing sense that high-level political decisions are once again being made without sufficient regard for the livelihoods of those most directly affected. In financial markets, the response has been immediate. Shares of major EV manufacturers and mining firms with exposure to the North American market have seen sharp declines. Analysts are warning of a prolonged period of volatility, especially as investors try to assess what comes next. Venture capital funding for EV-related startups in Canada may dry up if uncertainty persists. Meanwhile, U.S. companies relying on Canadian inputs may be forced to reconfigure their operations or pass increased costs onto consumers. Inflationary pressures could rise in an industry already struggling with cost containment. Beyond the numbers, there is a deeper, more intangible loss: trust. The EV agreement had symbolized a new chapter in U.S.-Canada relations, one built not just on history but on forward-looking collaboration. Its sudden unraveling, spurred by unilateral U.S. policy shifts, undermines the predictability and mutual respect that successful partnerships require. It also sets a precedent. If one side can walk away from key tenets of economic cooperation, the other may feel compelled to do the same in future disputes, potentially unraveling other sectors of bilateral trade. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Canada breaking the EV deal? What do you expect next? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.